You want to support Roland Martin Unfiltered? Be sure to join our Bring the Funk fan club. Every dollar that you give to us supports our daily digital show. There's only one daily digital show out here that keeps it black and keep it real. It's Roland Martin Unfiltered. By going to RolandMartinUnfiltered.com, you can make this possible. All right, folks, today in a federal court, a judge decided that Harvard, they're allowing affirmative action, race to be used in their admissions policy is constitutional. Let me say that again. It's constitutional. Back in 2014, Students for Fair Admissions filed federal lawsuits against Harvard and the University of North Carolina, alleging that both institutions' admissions practices were discriminatory. But today in Massachusetts, a district court judge ruled that Harvard University's admissions process does not discriminate against Asian American applicants. Now, these Asian American applicants, they said that they were being discriminated against because Harvard allowed race to be used. What also came out in this trial was the use of legacy, which actually benefits white folks. Now, U.S. District Judge Allison Burroughs ruled that while Harvard could tweak its admissions process with more training and monitoring, it is very fine. And while a court rejected motions for summary judgment in the case involving UNC's diversity efforts, Robert Patillo, I want to go to you first about this decision. The Harvard case, they likely are going to appeal to the Supreme Court. But what I found to be interesting in this, again, you had these Asian American applicants who are trying to sue Harvard because, frankly, they contend that they want more of their kids in Harvard. They want to take advantage of, again, this #1 Ivy League school, and try to suggest that somehow the use of race, targeting black folks and others, but the real problem for Asian Americans at Harvard are white folks and legacy.
Well, this is one of those issues that we, if we could roll back time to when we were making these federal regulations, I think they would have been drafted significantly differently. Let's understand that we are having an argument about whether or not Asian Americans are being discriminated against when they make a far larger percentage of the population at a school such as Harvard and many other Ivy League universities. In addition to this, we have the information that we have all known previously, which is that universities are allowing the legacies, the children of previous Harvard graduates to get in on easier criteria than the rest of us. So what we have to do is, when we are addressing diversity and inclusion programs at schools, do not let them lump us in with people of color. Do not let them lump us in with the word minority. We have to make sure they explicitly say that they are helping the African American community. Otherwise, we will see this going forward, that every program is helping legacy students, helping everyone except for black folks get into these schools.
Jason, in fact, it's an interesting point. I was in Seattle on Saturday speaking to the Tabor 100, and there's a bill called, well, first of all, they repealed affirmative action by ballot initiative in the state of Washington. They passed it this year, and the legislature passed it, but then the folks who are against that came back to put it on the ballot. It's called I-1000. And what they're doing is, the people who are opposing it are Chinese nationals. And so these Chinese nationals in Seattle, or in the state of Washington, are fighting this because what they're saying is that if this passes, then it's going to hurt them. They're not going to be able to get their kids and others into these universities if affirmative action is allowed, meaning they might have to go back to China. And so what you have is, and again, these folks like Ward Conley and these white conservatives, they're actually using Asian Americans to try to take down affirmative action.
Well, they've done this several times. They used to use white women. Mm-hmm. That was the tool. Yep. You know, Gratz versus Bollinger, you know, many of the other cases, Amber, Stay Mad Fisher. Is it Amber?
Abby,
I'm sorry. Abby Fisher.
Yeah, out of Texas.
Right, out of Texas. So they've oftentimes used people who have been marginalized in education in the past, or people of color, and trying to complicate this issue, but it's thinly veiled. Number one, Asian Americans make up about 5% of our population. They made up, I believe in 2015, they made up still 20% of the incoming class at Harvard. So they're 4 times overrepresented, whereas African Americans are about equal. You know, they make up about 13% of the population. They're about 15% of the incoming class at Harvard. So if anything, this is making these universities more equitable, taking groups that have been disenfranchised and marginalized for a long time and allowing them opportunities to get a Harvard education. And I would ask anybody who's against this, is it that you think that African Americans are not capable? You know, I want people to don't give me the but. Tell me, is it that you think that African Americans aren't capable? Do you think that the people that you praise, even the conservatives, that that have graduated from Ivy League schools, whether it's Clarence Thomas or whomever, is it that you think that they are not capable of matriculating? If the answer is I do think that they're capable, then you should not have a problem with them getting more opportunities. It doesn't that I always tell students, affirmative action opens a door. That's it. But it doesn't take a test for you. I don't give any of my students extra points like, oh yeah, you pulled out your black card, here you go. Here's 5 extra points on that exam. You have to make it through.
Right. Erica, here's what's interesting, to Jason's point and Robert's point. Asian Americans make up 1/4 of Harvard's admitted class, but they only count for 6% of U.S. population. And this is what the judge said, even assuming that there is a statistically significant difference between how Asian American and white applicants score on the personal rating, the data does not clearly say what accounts for that difference. In other words, although the statistics perhaps tell what they do not tell why, and here the why is critically important.
Sure, and I think we have to go back to when these legislative acts were actually enacted. And now you think about fair housing, we think about civil rights, the Voting Rights Act that definitely has been chunked into. All of these different 20th century pieces of legislation are now under attack. And so I agree with what you said, Dr. Jason, and what Robert said as well. I think it's really important to disaggregate for Black Americans to look at, and the question has to be asked too, is it that it is thought that Black folks aren't as competent to be able to get into these programs or not, and move it forward from there. And also definitely in agreement with lumping us all into people of color, because what that does is it kind of waters down who these people that were at the forefront, ensuring that these pieces of legislation, these acts were in place so that there could be some level of equity as we matriculated through education, housing, and things of that nature.
But Kelly, I think what we have to do is understand, again, what the rationale behind that. So, for instance, when you hear about MWBE, Minority and Women Business Enterprise, the reality is there was a racist from Virginia, Congressman Judge Smith, who put women into the Civil Rights Act of 1964 because he thought that was going to kill it. The Civil Rights Act of 64 initially did not include women, which really means it included white women, because if you were Black, you were under the category.
Right.
So they put women in there. So the reason women are covered under the Civil Rights Act of 64 is because of that. But what ended up happening was, when you talk about affirmative action and other programs, it then became this focus on, women. So even today, when I remember I was in Chicago when I was working for the Chicago Defender and WVON Radio, and they were talking about contracts. And they listed the percentage of contracts that women got, and then it was Black, it was Hispanic, it was Asian. And I said, question for you, where do the Black women go?
Right.
They said, well, under Black. I said, where do Hispanic women? Under Hispanic, Asian women. I said, so really that W should be WW, should be white women.
Right.
And what I think what we do have to be very clear, and like when I'm giving speeches, when I'm talking about affirmative action, I'm talking about Black folks. I'm talking about African Americans, because what I'm talking about really how the laws came about. And I think what you see here which is why I challenged President George W. Bush on this very issue on legacy in 2004. White folks love to criticize affirmative action, but they got no problem with legacy, and because that's frankly white affirmative action. That's what it is.
No. There is a difference. So everybody's been talking about, equality and making sure that things are equitable in terms of affirmative action. But to me, I think there's a difference between the concept of equality and the concept of justice. So justice is something that no matter what it takes to make sure that everybody's on equal footing, that is what is going to happen in order for people to have justice. So the affirmative action initiative regarding Harvard is a pathway to justice. So it doesn't matter. Harvard is doing whatever it takes to make sure that there is equitability there. But equality means, to me, that it doesn't matter what footing you're on, everybody's getting the same thing. So if white people already have an advantage and you're giving white people another thing, even though it's the same amount amongst black people, amongst Hispanics, amongst Asians, they're still getting a higher advantage. So with affirmative action, the original goal was not what's happening in what I just described, this equality model. It was supposed to be a model for justice, meaning that white people already have the advantage. We're trying to get to where they are as is. But when you do stuff like lump all minorities together and separate women from other demographic groups, what happens is you, like you said, Erica, you dilute the purpose, you dilute the original goal. So the fact that the judge in, what was it, Massachusetts District Court, you know, the fact that that happened and she said, you know, everything's just fine, you know, it's not, but it's good that nothing changed.
Jason, you want to make a point?
I just want to
make a point. I'm going to go to Robert real quick, then I go to a break.
Okay, really quickly, I just wanted to say, we've been talking a lot about legacies, but I think one of the big things is children of donors is another big way that white people get ahead. And actually,
no, it's the same thing. I mean, the reality is, I mean, look, Jared Kushner got into Harvard because his daddy gave he gave several $1 million. I mean, and that's what you see. And so legacy is tied to it as well because, again, what I made this point when I questioned George W. Bush, Robert, and that is my grandfather could not go to those institutions. My parents really couldn't go. Yeah, they admitted black folks. We knew what the game was. So the reality is if you are a white student and you are using the legacy of your grandfather to get into those schools, you actually have a benefit that I could never have because my grandfather couldn't get in. And every time I hear these people, in fact, I remember when Bob Gates was the president of Texas A&M University, and all these people wanted him to get rid of race being included. And I give Bob Gates credit. He said, we getting rid of race in admissions, we're getting rid of legacy. All these white Aggies lost their minds because he said, you can't call that unfair if you don't call legacy unfair. Robert, final comment.
Well, I think it's very important that as we go through this campaign season, as these candidates start talking about the idea of reparations, use this as an example and make sure they call it out by name, that they are providing reparations to African Americans, the descendants of slaves, not that they are going to provide a tax credit to all marginalized people or some of these other plans. Make it plain, make them put it in writing.
Well, we'll see what happens. All right, folks, back to our Roland Mark Unfiltered video in just one moment. That's my alpha brother, Gerald Albright, one of the major headliners at the Luxe Jazz Experience taking place in Los Cabos, November 7th through the 11th. It's going to take place at the Omnia Day Club, Los Cabos, Deso on the Sea of Cortez. It's going to be a great experience, folks. All kind of great food and music. Of course, you're talking about breathtaking golf, spa, health, and wellness options, you name it. All of that for the second annual Luxe Jazz Experience. Now, of course, they're going to have great excursions, including the Spirit of Jazz Gospel Brunch, the Jazz Sunset Cruise. Confirmed guests, comedian actor Mark Curry, Gerald Albright, Alex Boone Young, Raul Madan, Incognito, Kirk Whalum, Pieces of a Dream, Average White Band, Donna McClurkin, Shalea, Roy Ayers, Tom Brown, Ronnie Laws, Ernest Quarles, and more. For more information, go to lifeluxejazz.com, lifeluxejazz.com. Now back to your Roland Martin Unfiltered video.